Alright, this video is for the beginning of States of Consciousness unit for modules 22 through 24. So first we're going to talk about in this video hypnosis. So first we have to define what exactly is consciousness. Consciousness is our awareness of ourself in your environment. So you are pretty much aware of what is going on around you, what you were doing, and that you understand what is going on in your head. This is consciousness, basically. Now we can talk about different states of consciousness. You could talk about altered states of consciousness. Hypnosis is one, which we'll talk about in a minute. You could also talk about how drugs affect your consciousness, which we will look at later on in this unit, as well as things like meditation. By the way, if you've ever tried meditation, it can be very good and healthy for you. However, by the way, if you're doing meditation correctly, you do not fall asleep. Some people think you're supposed to. No, you're not. Sleep is basically unconscious, so it's the opposite of that. That's why sleep is in this unit as well. So we are talking about this awareness of what's going on around us. So this kind of, I don't know, Zen approach, right? So hypnosis is one state of consciousness. This is when you have this social interaction between one person who's going to suggest something to you that will spontaneously occur. If you have ever seen anybody be hypnotized, it's very fascinating to watch. At this point in time, I do not know anybody that can hypnotize people. I wish I could, because then I would bring them into class and have them talk about what they do. But I don't. So I can explain what I have seen. I've actually seen hypnosis twice in my life. The first time I saw it was actually when I was in high school. I went to a public high school, and after graduation they had like a post-graduation party, kind of like an after prom party. It's one of those things where they have a bunch of different activities for you to do. They had, like sumo wrestling, and they had some they had some casino night, and then they also had a hypnotist. So the interesting thing was that so they had this hypnotist, and it was kind of a nice smaller setting because it was just the senior class and whoever had come from the senior class, I should say. And so they had this hypnotist. He was an entertainer. He asked for volunteers, and so people volunteered. I don't think I volunteered. I don't remember, but I was not chosen. But one of my friends was, and she was and still is a very small person. She was a gymnast at the time, so stereotypical gymnast. She's very small, very tiny, petite. Okay. This hypnotist brought them all up on stage, and he hypnotized all of them and brought them all under, and then he was having them all do kind of silly things. And one of the things that really stuck with me that I remember was that there was a point where he had like this stick or something on the ground near the front of the stage, and he brought up this big football player guy, and he was stereotypical football player. So he was a big guy, and he comes up, and the hypnotist tells him that this stick right here, this is a very heavy stick. This is the heaviest stick you've ever tried picking up. You're not going to be able to pick this thing up. So of course he has the football player to attempt to pick it up, and he's struggling, and he can't do it. So then he brings up my friend, who's like this little gymnast, right? And he brings her up, and he's just like, this is the lightest thing that you have ever picked up. You're going to pick it up, and you're just going to easily lift it up above your head. And that's exactly what she did. She just, both of them have kind of this vague look on their eyes, and she picked it up, lifted over her head, and I still cannot, to this day, remember the look on this football player's face where he was just dumbstruck. And I mean, I wish I could show you what his face looks like on this video, but I won't. But he was just dumbstruck, and he's just like, oh my gosh, what? How is she doing this? Right? And after the fact, they did a few more things, and then they sent them all back. And we talked to my friend, and we're like, Melanie, how was it? What was it like? And she's like, it was kind of like, almost like, being kind of like a foggy kind of a thing, almost like when you're going to sleep, where you're kind of aware of, somebody talking to you, but you're not really. That's what it felt like. She said, I kind of heard things and I remember things, but not everything. So it's kind of a weird experience. The second time I saw a hypnotist was actually a year later when I was in college. They actually had a hypnotist come in for like the entire student body, and obviously that was a lot of people, so there was no chances that I was going to be picked, and I didn't know anybody in that case. And they had everybody get up, and do some silly things. And if you remember that Barbie song, I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Yeah, now you're singing it. So that song, they had people get up and, dance to, and they had somebody pretend they were Barbie and somebody pretend they're Ken and, do all these outrageous, crazy things. Well, everybody has their own thoughts about hypnosis. So what's the truth? Well, the truth about hypnosis is that the power of hypnotism is actually not in the power of the hands of the person that is hypnotizing. It's actually in the power of the hands of the person being hypnotized. Because that person has to be open to suggestion. You have to be willing to be hypnotized. Some people are more open than others, as well as if you don't want to be hypnotized and you think this is a bunch of crap and there's no way it's going to work, it ain't going to work. Okay, you have to be open to it. Now in class I did a bunch of little demonstrations of, you had to imagine holding three heavy dictionaries in your left hand and, feel the weight of the dictionary and all this stuff, and, imagining yourself on this warm beach and everything else. I won't do it on the video here. But, that kind of gives you an idea. The closer you felt like that was to being actually holding three heavy dictionaries or actually on the beach, that basically shows whether or not you would be open to hypnotism if you ever had the chance. And would you be open to actually being hypnotized? So that's kind of the point of that. Memories, however, cannot come back from hypnosis. They are not reliable. You cannot go and, for example, have an eyewitness who says, oh, I can't remember what this guy's face looked like, the perpetrator. Oh, well, we'll just hypnotize you and, you'll be able to fill in the blanks. It doesn't work like that. For a while, I know I heard that celebrities were really into this, where they were going and being hypnotized to try and, remember earlier experiences, even past experiences, past lives, and, was once, Cleopatra, or, oh my gosh, my father, sexually abused me, or whatever, right? Those are not reliable. There's so much of that, and when we get to talking about memory, you'll find why it's not reliable, but so much of that is a result of the suggestion of the hypnotist. It's not reliable at all. However, post-hypnotic suggestions can be helpful in some cases. For example, as this picture demonstrates, hopefully you understand that guy is obviously in pain. He's having a headache, right? So this post-hypnotic suggestion can be helpful in cases that it has been helpful in cases of, for example, tension headaches. So if you get a headache, this post-hypnotic suggestion of saying that, anytime you feel a headache, you will automatically relax. You will feel the headache, the tension just leaving your body with every breath that you take. That's actually been proven helpful for some people. Again, you have to actually believe in it. Also, dieting, it has been helpful for. So, for example, if you have a particular go-to food that's really bad for you, like, for example, donuts there, you could have, a hypnotist leave a post-hypnotic suggestion where, donuts taste like dirt, that kind of a thing, or, you want to eat more vegetables, you crave vegetables, or, it tastes like candy to you, right? So post-hypnotic suggestions can be helpful. They are not helpful, generally speaking, with like addictions. For example, smoking. You can't get over smoking through hypnosis. People have, varying results. Generally speaking, it's not helpful. So there is that. Hypnosis has also been helpful with acute pain, but it works as well as anything else for chronic pain. Now, the difference between acute and chronic, acute pain is going to be temporary pain. So, for example, if we're talking about, let's say, an operation, chronic pain is going to be like you have chronic back problems, right? And it's like hurting almost all the time. That's chronic. Acute pain, because it's temporary, for example, like the surgery here, it can be helpful in that case because it's basically distracting you from the pain. That's what hypnosis does. I actually had a student that told me that she had a sister that had that was hypnotized before surgery, and she can't remember if she actually had anesthesia or not. But there are cases where they don't have anesthesia or very little anesthesia because they were hypnotized, and basically they do the entire surgery like that, because they're giving you a distraction and they're distracted by whatever the hypnotist is having you think about. So that's why it's helpful in those kinds of cases. Now, how do we explain hypnosis? Why does this actually happen? What's going on here? Well, some people say it's just a social phenomenon and all we're doing is just acting the part, and we're just basically acting like we think people want us to believe, and it's not even necessarily a conscious effort on our part. It's more of a, we're just kind of following along with things. So I kind of think of Joey Tribbiani from Friends, right? If you know the show and the character, he's known as being kind of this, he's a good-looking guy, but, he's very loyal and he's very nice, but he's kind of dim-witted. He's very gullible, right? This particular picture, it says, well, the fridge broke, so I had to eat everything. Never occurred to him he could do something else with the food, right? But the social phenomenon is we're just acting the part, where we're following the character and we're following what we think that people want us to do. So same thing with Joey Tribbiani, where, all of his actions were all following that kind of likable, nice, kind of daft guy and that persona. That's the idea of social phenomena. On the flip side, another guy by the name of Ernest Hilgard actually believes that hypnosis is more like a dissociation, where we're actually splitting levels of consciousness. Later when we talk about abnormal behavior and psychological disorders, we'll talk about dissociative disorders. And for example, we'll talk about dissociative identity disorder, dissociative amnesia, dissociative fugue. In all of those cases, you have basically this split in your brain. The best known example of dissociative identity disorder basically is going to be where you have split personalities. Now, Ernest Hilgard is not saying you have split personalities when you're experiencing hypnosis, but it gives you kind of an idea of what he's talking about, where he's basically saying that you are experiencing something at a different level, and it's almost like you're a different person, but not really, if that makes any sense. All right, well, that's it for hypnosis. Let me know if you have any questions. Next step would be sleep.